Good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. I want to thank the Robina Institute for inviting me and bringing all of you here today to think about the future of criminal law. One of the issues that has perplexed me and something that I'm just incredibly passionate about is this problem that we have with respect to the racial disparities that we have in our community, and certainly the criminal justice system, our delinquency system, plays a role in the solution and also with respect to some of the problems that we have. And so what I wanted to do is, and I'm going to try to get through these slides as quickly as possible because I've been reminded that we only have 15 minutes. But I want to start with some remarks from our president, President Obama. Because I think he will, frame the need for why we need to think about this issue about racial disparities and why we need to take action. And so the next slide, I believe, is about 4 minutes of his remarks.
50 years after Dr. King talked about his dream for America's children, the stubborn fact is that the life chances of the average black or brown child in this country lags behind by almost every measure, and it's worse for boys and young men. If you're African American, there's about 1 in 2 chance you grow up without a father in your house. 1 in 2. If you're Latino, you have about 1 in 4 chance. We know that boys who grow up without a father are more likely to be poor, more likely to underperform in school. As a black student, you are far less likely than a white student to be able to read proficiently by the time you are in 4th grade. By the time you reach high school, you're far more likely to have been suspended or expelled. There's a higher chance you end up in the criminal justice system, and a far higher chance that you are the victim of a violent crime. Fewer young black and Latino men participate in the labor force compared to young white men. And all of this translates into higher unemployment rates and poverty rates as adults. And the worst part is we've become numb to these statistics. We're not surprised by them. We take them as the norm. We just assume this is an inevitable part of American life, instead of the outrage that it is. That's how we think about it. It's like a cultural backdrop for us. In movies, television, we just assume, of course it's going to be like that. But these statistics should break our hearts. And they should compel us to act. You know, Michelle and I are blessed with 2 beautiful daughters. We don't have a son. But I know if I had a son, on the day he was born, I would have felt everything I felt with Billy and Sasha. The awe, the gratitude, the overwhelming sense of responsibility to do everything in my power to protect that amazing new life from this big world out there. And just as our daughters are growing up into wonderful, beautiful young women, I want my son to feel a sense of boundless possibility. I want him to have independence and confidence. And I want him to have empathy and compassion. I want him to have a sense of diligence and commitment and respect for others and himself. The tools that he'd need to succeed. I don't have a son, but as parents, that's what we should want, not just for our children, but for all children. And I believe the continuing struggles of so many boys and young men, the fact that too many of them are falling by the wayside, dropping out, unemployed, involved in negative behavior, going to jail, being profiled. This is a moral issue for our country. It's also an economic issue for our country. After all, these boys are a growing segment of our population. They are our future workforce. When generation after generation they lag behind, our economy suffers. Our family structure suffers. Our civic life suffers. Cycles of hopelessness breed violence and mistrust. And our country is a little less than what we know it can be. So we need to change the statistics. Not just for the sake of the young men and boys, but for the sake of America's future.
So when we think about President Obama's remarks and his calling out of this situation that we have of just great economic and racial disparities that we have that play out in our criminal and juvenile justice systems and just in society as a whole, the whole concept of trying to make a difference around this issue, I think, can be very daunting. And oftentimes, when I think about the criminal justice system, it's like this large assembly line, and there's just a lot of volume that needs to get done, and everybody has a very distinct role to play. But without question, I think that the criminal justice system can play a role in some of the issues that President Obama talked about. And in the criminal justice system, the juvenile justice system, oftentimes we work in silos, and so we have certain aspects of the system, whether it's police, whether it's prosecutors, probation officials, we all are working on various things. But from a law enforcement, from my world, from a prosecution, law enforcement perspective, a lot of the things that we see are downstream, meaning that if you think about a river, we're at the downstream of the river, and we catch a lot of, and there's a lot of sometimes good things that happen in our world. One of the things I want to talk about is things that are happening in Ramsey County. There's an initiative called the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, and the premise of all of this is that when we put kids in detention, there is harm that is being done. And so we have embarked since about 2005 to reduce kids in detention. And as you can see, these are the annual admissions to our juvenile detention center. And we've had a massive reduction in kids that are detained in Ramsey County. The average daily population was at one time 100. Today, it's about 20. But at the same time, although we've had reductions in the number of kids in detention, the disparities with respect to who is in detention actually have gotten worse. There's less kids of color that are in detention than there was when we started, but still, despite all of the great efforts that have been undertaken in Ramsey County, still we are left with some of the disparities that still remain. And so oftentimes when we're downstream, the reality is, in my world, there's a lot of ugliness because of how the disparities play out. Just if any of you go to a arraignment court, first appearances down in Minneapolis, I don't know if they do them in the morning or the afternoon, but you'll see the disparity play out in our community. And so, and there's also just the worst of the worst in terms of crime that happens, and it's not pretty at all. And here's a reflection of some of the disparities that we have. If you take the Ramsey County population, and I also took the population of our school district, grades 5 through 12, and you look at the cases that are presented to our office, the delinquency cases, the juvenile cases, as you can see, there are great differences with respect to, if you look at the racial breakdown, and the one that concerns me the most is in the African American category, where you see a small portion of our population, and a little bit larger, but still a small portion of our school district population, but yet making up a large percentage of the delinquency cases that are presented to our office. And as you can see, over the years from 2005, and this only goes to 2011, but I can tell you that the number of cases that we've had in our office have continued to decline. But as you can see, the line for African American stays relatively flat, but the cases are going down, just like our experience with respect to the juvenile detention center. There's less kids in detention, but the percentage of disparity is getting larger. And if we look at some of the cases that have been presented to our office and then the percentage of cases that are charged, generally speaking, it's about the same. There's a small amount of disparity. And so as we think about how we can make a difference around these issues, I really think that we have to think differently. The way that we look at it right now, I know that this is all a lot of trees in the forest. I don't want you to focus on the trees. I want you to focus on the forest. This is our current paradigm. And everywhere in this paradigm, there's people that touch a juvenile delinquency matter. And it's really complicated. It takes a very long time for kids to get a first appearance. There's a lot of money that's spent on diversion and probation, trying to help kids. But the reality is that this is, when you go deep into the system, it's not a good thing at all. And so I think what we have to do is think about this paradigm that we have. And in my world, we have an adversarial system. And we ought to be rethinking all of this and think about how we can actually make, I think, a difference. And I think one of the things that I want to convey to all of you is that the solution does not remain solely on just tinkering or dealing with in here, but what we need to do is we need to get to go upstream and start working with other sectors in terms of human services and others to actually think about ways to change all of that. And I think one of the things that I want to talk about is when we think about that big forest, to shift the way that we actually pay for these investments. We have just an extraordinary amount of money that we spend on the back end, downstream. And what we need to do is start figuring out ways to shift the money on the front end so that it's before the delinquency system. I also think that we need to, when we think about buying these outcomes, we need to intentionally purchase outcomes, and actually what gets measured or what you are purchasing will change. And so right now, today, every contract for diversion, probation services, we want to know what your recidivism rate is. Well, that's a negative. We ought to be thinking about some of the positive things like connection to education, caring adults. We also need to do more work on how we share data between entities, whether it's a school district and police and prosecutors, because I think we all have data, but we don't share it with one another to help us make more impactful and better decisions. And I also think that we need to engage the community to be involved in this particular solution. There's a lot of work being done in Milwaukee about holistic and wraparound services. And I think we need to also think about how we demand these outcomes. We tend to do them with volume intervention. We tend to count in the criminal justice system, and what we need to be doing is thinking about how we think about doing an effective intervention one case at a time. Now, all of this is going to take a lot of money, and I think we need to think about ways in the criminal justice system how we can creatively finance all of this. There's ways that I believe that we could develop medical reimbursement model so that we could pay for some of the mental health issues that a lot of the kids and families that present. And I'm a big supporter of this concept of paying for success. I'd love to figure out a way to, instead of paying for things as they come and paying for, basically for people just to process work, to think about a way that we can engage the public to think about how we could actually buy outcomes. And the outcomes that I would suggest would be in the area of educational attainment. And one of the things that I think can make a whole world of a difference is when one person has people that care about them in their life, that makes all the difference in the world. And another big part of this is expanding the pie. It would be politically impossible today, I think, for a community to talk about an investment of $1 million per year or even greater around what President Obama talked about to eliminate and reduce disparities. Why is that? Because I think we have not engaged the public about how what they should be purchasing with their public dollars. Again, so there's that paradigm, and I think we need to rethink all of that. And again, it's not so much about what happens in the trees, but it's a forest. And I think there's things that we need to do upstream instead of dealing with all of this stuff downstream. So it was Albert Einstein who said that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And I really believe that in order for us to, as a community, to make a difference around the issue of the way that we're headed with respect to disparities, we need to think differently and be intentional about it, and believe that it's not just solely things that can happen within the criminal justice system, but it's about how we can partner with other aspects of our community. Thank you.